Hey, welcome to the Dr. Pete Goldman Show. I'm super excited to have ex-NHLer Randy Holt with me. Randy, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so let me just give a little introduction. So when I was a kid in New York City, my family had season tickets to the New York Rangers. So even though it's hard to be a hockey player if you're from New York City, and even though I was an athletic kid, I played a lot of sports. It's kind of hard to play ice hockey. There's not a lot of ice, but my favorite sport was hockey. And I started going to Ranger games when I was probably about 10 years old in 1977. So I watched Randy Holt play quite a bit. So it was real exciting for me to get to talk to him and interview him. So Randy, let's start with this. When you were a little kid, what were your hockey aspirations when you were playing as a kid? Did you think you'd be in the NHL? Did you always want to play defense? Did you know what kind of style you would play? What were your thoughts about hockey when you were little?
Well, our family on a Saturday night, it was the only time that we all sat together for hockey night in Canada, and some of those nights weren't very nice because my mother was a Montreal Canadian fan and my father was a Toronto Maple Leaf fan. And so they would be mouthing off to each other. And us kids would be watching the hockey. Then it was unusual for us because our family didn't have much money. Hockey is a very expensive. So anyway, I didn't start until I believe bantam. So that was let's say that's 11 going on 12. My older brother Gary, he was 1 year older. He talked me into going because we played road hockey down the street with a bunch of people that did play hockey. I was kind of shy. Gary said, "Come with me." We went together. Gary and I played bantam together. Now this is the kind of ridiculous because I just started hockey, but I made the all-star team, and Gary did too, for bantam, and we won Northern Ontario Championship. We then jumped from bantam right into juvenile hockey. I was 15, Gary was 16, and it went well for us with the New Liskeard Cubs, good hockey league up there. And then I was asked to, Gary and I both were asked to go to Sudbury to play for the Sudbury Wolves. And that year went well for both of us, but I was drafted by the Niagara Falls Flyers of the OHA. So this is all happening very quick. I didn't start hockey till I was 12. 16, I'm being drafted to the Niagara Falls Flyers, Major Junior A. And Gary came along with me. I asked Hap Ams, who was the owner of Niagara Falls Flyers, I said, I won't go unless you bring my brother also. Gary ended up being a big star in the NOHA that first year, but with the Niagara Falls Flyers, I got to play a lot. Gary didn't get to play as much. Long story short, I get to my 19th year birthday, and I'm drafted by Chicago Blackhawks. And
so were you playing defense all those years? You were always a defenseman, or you played a forward a little bit at first?
Well, in juvenile, I think the reason I chose defense, I think it was coaches later on that tried to make me a forward, but I chose defense because of Bobby Orr. Everybody wanted to be Bobby Orr. And I think that's how I got to be a defenseman.
How old were you when the physical aspect of the game started becoming part of your game? You were obviously a very good player. You got drafted pretty high into the NHL, but how old were you when you started employing the physical part?
right from the beginning. What we did in our family, we weren't allowed to just be kids that had the summer off. Um, I, our mother, whose brother was the owner of his own lumberjack camp in southern Ontario, she sent Gary and I there when we were 11 and 12 years old to work this summer 6 days a week. While all the other kids are having fun at the beach, Gary and I are working very physical work. We truly believe that that physical work made us into better hockey players. We were way stronger.
So so based on these things that happened in your childhood, it was making you tough physically and mentally. Of course, anyone who knows about hockey knows that there's a certain strategy and technique in fighting on the ice. Did you have kind of some mentors for that, or you just picked it up by watching and doing?
I believe watching and doing, and one time, and I'm not sure when, I ended up grabbing the guy, his shirt, the back of his neck, and with my right hand, and my left hand, I like to throw as fast as possible. And what I found out is I didn't have to be looking at this guy's face. I just punched through his face to my hand. And that was my strategy for the rest of my life.
And actually, it's interesting that you mentioned punching fast, because as you know, me and you have also chatted before this, and there were some guys who had a very heavy punch. Some guys didn't have a heavy punch. Some guys threw very fast. Some guys didn't throw as fast. But you seem to have a combination of a fast and heavy punch, which is hard to deal with for people.
Well, I really believe, again, that it was working in the lumberjack camp every summer from 11 years old to 17 or 18 years old. Gary said to me, my older brother, he said, "Wrangler, do you ever notice that we're way stronger than our friends?" And that had to do with the summer. Most of the kids that were our friends, they were the normal, go to the beach and do nothing all summer. Gary and I weren't allowed to do that.
And also, your playing weight. I mean, if you're 5'11", your playing weight was 185. So a guy who's 5'11", 185, fighting guys like Barry Beck, who are 6'3", 215, and another guy who punches fast and heavy. Not to mention Clark Gillies and a lot of other big tough guys. How many guys, as strong as you were at the NHL level, how many guys did you lock up with and say, "Wow, this guy is strong like me"?
Well, Barry Beck definitely was one of them. I actually have communicated with Barry Beck. I never knew him, but he's living in Korea or something.
Hong Kong, I think. Hong Kong, if I'm not mistaken.
Hong Kong, you're right. And so somehow he showed up on the thing, and I said, "I remember you as a very powerful person, and you were a pretty good hockey player also." And he said thanks, and we had a little talk, and I still get him on the here. He shows pictures all the time, but I never. For instance, I'll give you an example. Calgary Flames, biggest team I ever played on. Willie Plett, one of the best fighters. We had a few others that were, but the team was the biggest team I ever played on. We had a few others, but we're doing weightlifting, right? Well, guess who was #1 weightlifter? Me. I did close to 400 pounds bench press. What do you call it? I think those other big tough guys, they just barely could do 200. So that gives you an idea that when I grab them in my spot, I'm able to pull them towards me and get results. And again, that goes back to working in the lumberjack camps as a child.
Got it. What, speaking of, we mentioned Barry Beck, Willie Plett. Let me ask, and we'll get to some other interesting topics too, of course. Let me ask about some particular players that you had some, run-ins with. Just want to get your impressions on the fight itself, why it happened, what was said after, things like that. Let's start with Bobby Nystrom, who is, also about your weight, not one of the bigger guys, but a premier fighter. How did that all happen against the Islanders, you and Bobby Nystrom?
Well, I think because I actually went after Trottier, and um, and Dennis Potvin, I fought him in junior, and Dennis never came near me in the NHL. I don't think it's because he was afraid of me. I think because he was a superstar, and that should be whoever was going to deal with me should be a lesser player. You don't want a superstar to go off with a 5-minute major with an ordinary NHL player. But that team, they had a team. I fought Clark Gillies, but then I think it was Nystrom. He was on the ice with Trottier, and Trottier was just getting ready to, in my memory, to score a goal when I cross-checked him across the back of the head. So I was going to get a 2-minute penalty, but it prevented the goal. But Nystrom was not going to allow that to happen. So he came flying in, and we got into the fight. And he is one of the most respected, that I respect, players in the league. And I think that's all after the fight, he said, "Why the hell did you do that?" And I said, "To stop a goal."
Okay, that was a legitimate answer that he could respect.
Yeah, well, he didn't say anything after that, and I don't know how these guys, what they ever thought of me after. I never thought about it during my career, but after, I suppose, I'm wondering what they thought of me, but I don't have an answer.
Right. Well, maybe you'll run into him on Facebook like Barry Beck. Maybe you'll be chatting with Bobby Nystrom one day. Who knows?
That's true.
Another interesting one I wanted to ask you about was Nick Fotiu, because Nick Fotiu, I mean, he was just a frightening guy. As a matter of fact, by the way, I don't know if you know this, but when Dave Schultz wrote his autobiography, this is in Dave Schultz's autobiography, he said that he was never really afraid of anybody. I mean, he might have lost once in a while, but he said he was not afraid. He said the only guy I was afraid of, I just wanted no part of, was Nick Fotiu. That's from Dave Schultz. Now, obviously, you had a run in with Nick Fotiu. Could you tell me about that and what he said after and how that went down?
Well, Dave, very quickly about Dave Schultz, I fought him. I didn't consider him a great fighter. Not in the Nystrom, not in the Barry Beck, whatever. Nicky was different. He played kind of a weird style of hockey. It's like he was going someplace with a mission. That's how he played. And he is when you got the size of his shoulders and he could skate in a straight line really good. You better not be caught in the corner with him trying to get the puck. You better have something done with the puck. And Nicky, he and I had a few run-ins in the corner, and it turned into fisticuffs. And I said to him, why the hell did this have to be? He says, I have a job to do. And then another time I fought him, I cross-checked somebody. I think I was with Vancouver Canucks. I cross-checked the Ranger player right in front of the Ranger bench, and Nicky was on the ice, and of course he challenged me, and we went at it, and I said, "What's that all about?" And he goes, "Well, look what you did to that player. You cross-checked him." And I said, "Well, I suppose so, but what's that got to do with you?" And he goes, "Randy, I can't allow that." But that little talk together, even using my first name, Randy, he showed me respect, and I said, "Oh, he respects me," and of course, I respected him.
Another one that's worth discussing before we get to some other topics. But on the subject of different players and different fights and stuff, probably I bet you one of the ones you've been asked about the most was Paul Holmgren, just by virtue of the fact that that was in a game with a bench clearing brawl where you had so many penalty minutes, which I believe was and maybe still is an NHL record.
It is the record still.
Yeah, still a record. So for those who don't know, I'll just tell them, Paul Holmgren must have been 6'2" or 6'3", 215, around there.
Yeah.
He was a righty. He didn't lose too many. Very athletic, tough guy. Pretty good player also, by the way.
Yep, he was.
He played for Philadelphia, then Minnesota. He might have played somewhere else. I'm not sure. But in the bench clearing brawl, you were with Los Angeles, if I'm not mistaken, at the time.
Yes.
You guys came together and you were throwing lefts and he was throwing rights. And I mean, you staggered him. You threw a left. He basically just held on. He was, if you weren't there to hold him, he probably would have fell down. And then it seemed to calm down a bit. How did that start, and what was said after, and anything else you want to mention about that?
Well, I did not like the Philadelphia Flyers. They clearly, all the teams that I played on up until I actually played with them, they clearly, the first period, they were going to try and scare the shit out of everybody on the ice. Then after they get them scared, they send in the hockey players to mop it up. Well, there's no way I'm going to allow that to happen in the first period on any team I ever play on. And well, this time it was the Los Angeles Kings, and Marcel Dion was one of the best players in hockey. His line was one of the top lines in hockey, and Philadelphia did not show him any respect. And so when I was on the ice with Marcel, if I watched on purpose to see if anybody's abusing him, and they were. And so I went after a couple of them, and I one-punched Ken Linsman. The fight was over. I probably 3, 4, 5 punched Frank Bathe. Then the fight was over. Now, when Paul came to me, I could understand exactly why he came to me. Everybody was on the ice, and Paul comes up, because I think most of our team didn't want any part of him. He shows up, nobody even grabbing on with him. And he goes, Randy, and this is where I respected him. I really respect Paul Holmgren. He goes, Randy, you've made us look bad. We got to go. And the mistake that Paul made, which we laughed about when I went to Philly, is he goes, which hand do you want? And I said, my left. And I rat-a-tat-tatted him, and I got him good. And all of a sudden he pulls me in because he's so big and strong. And 6'3", 215, like you said, or 225. I go, is that it, Paul, or do we go again? And he goes, that's it. And he lets go of me. And the ref comes right over and says, Randy, you have to go off the ice because you've got like 3 game misconduct, 67 minutes and penalties. And I said to the ref, I said, you can't add because there's no way I have that many. He goes, you get, for the 3 people that you one punched or two punched, 2 of them, and your fight with Paul, you're going to get an automatic 3 game misconduct because Philadelphia comes to LA 3 games from now, and we don't want you playing. So I didn't understand it. It was beyond me. I skated off the ice. But when I look back, there's Paul Holmgren. Nobody still grabbed on with him. He just had a fight with me, and he's going around one punching a bunch of the LA Kings. And I asked him when I got to Philadelphia, I said, Paul, why did you, after you and I finished, why didn't you go off the ice? Why weren't you made to go off the ice? Why were you punching everybody? He goes, Randy, a lot of the players in your team, I don't respect. And those are the ones I went around punching because they did not hold their own. they had to count on you protecting them. And now you're gone, and so I got them. And we just laughed. And the greatest thing for me was to see Bobby Clarke in action, Paul Holdrum, the Philadelphia Flyers in action. I thought it was really neat, even though my career would end with my leg reconstruction. I got to watch a #1 team. And when you listen to Bobby Clarke and you listen to Paul Holdrum, well, you can tell because Paul Holdrum went on to be assistant general manager or whatever. Very, very smart leader. Both him and Bobby Clarke, I have incredible praise for.
Speaking of now, a couple things. So you mentioned just now about your experience in Philadelphia. You mentioned earlier also that your experience in Calgary was unique because there were so many big, tough guys that you didn't feel all the burden or pressure. Let's talk about some of the other experiences of some other teams. You played a little bit. You played a little bit with the Chicago Blackhawks. Am I correct? Just a little bit at first. So how did you enjoy that?
Well, I enjoyed it. It was the start of wondering why the heck I wasn't on the team as much as I thought I could be. And Billy Ray said, Randy, you got to do more than just fight. You got to be a hockey player. So if you don't mind, we're going to send you back to Dallas. And I went back to Dallas. I went from 411 minutes in penalties the last season. And after that talk with Billy Ray, I decided to show them I could play hockey. And by the end of that season, I was first All-Star and probably would have won best defenseman. My defense partner, Ian McKeagney, he won, and he came to me and said, Randy, I should never have won this. You should have. But the reason being is I was playing so good hockey, Chicago called me up and I missed 3 weeks of the season down in the minors.
Got it.
They still voted me first All-Star.
How about the Cleveland Barons, which of course they are extinct essentially, but how was your experience there?
Well, when I first was going from Chicago to the Cleveland, I was kind of upset, embarrassed, whatever. But when I got there, of course, they had Dennis Marouk, they had Al McAdam, they had some really good hockey players, and all I decided that I would try to play my best hockey, and I would fight because we weren't respected very, very well. And at the end of that season, I felt good about the season and how I stood up for everybody. And sure enough, they folded, and LA picked Vancouver. I think Vancouver picked me up.
Yeah, Dennis Marouk, if I'm not mistaken, he really came into his own. I think he played for Washington. That's where he was really a superstar.
Oh yeah, the year I played with him that last season, he scored 60 goals.
Yeah, he was great. Okay, so then you end up on Vancouver. How was that? As far as your teammates, your experience, did you enjoy Vancouver?
Well, I did. A few of the guys I had fought before, Harry Snaps, Jeff McElhardy. Again, to meet them, I think one of the greatest things that helped me is I did not look at size. I don't care if you're 7 feet or 3 feet. If you do something bad, I'm going to get you. And they found that out. Even I'm thinking of that 6'9" player that I think played for Montreal Canadiens way back then. I had to jump the highest I ever jumped just to get my grab on his sweater at his neck. Gilles Lupien. Do you remember that?
Yeah, Lupien. He had a great fight. Oh yeah, he had a few. He fought against, but when the Canadians played the Bruins, he seemed to have a lot of fights against the Bruins. I remember him. Yeah.
Well, he would, yeah, because the Bruins are feisty.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned Snaps, and I was whenever I watched Snep's fight, I was always amazed because he fought a lot of tough guys. He didn't lose too much, but at the same time, he didn't seem to have a very organized fighting technique, but somehow he did okay.
Well, I think Harry was he was a natural. He really liked to be a hockey player, and sometimes he was forced into it, and I don't know why. A lot of times because he's a big, strong person. But like you just said, that season or however long I was with Vancouver before LA, a lot of people stayed away from him, and those that decided to try him, I think they found out they made a mistake.
Yeah.
Jack McElhargy, on the other hand, he went looking for that stuff. He was very tough, but Jack, I don't think, was a great fighter.
Right. I would agree. Now let's go to Los Angeles. So when you get to the Kings, of course, first of all, playing in Los Angeles, you know, the weather is warm. It's a kind of there's more things to do there. How did you, just before we even get to the team and the teammates and things like that, how did you just like living in Los Angeles, or you didn't really care about that because you were focused on the game?
It was the first place I bought a house was in Los Angeles and near the airport. A beautiful little neighborhood, which I can't even remember now, but we still have friends on that street. She's a 40-some-year-old woman now, but she was our babysitter when she was 16 years old or whatever. And I liked LA. I think it worked out good for Lynn and I. My wife, we've been together since we were 14 years old. We went from 14 till 21. When I got drafted by the NHL, Lynn and I got married after the first season, and we've been together now. It's going on 56 years since we started dating at 14.
So she liked Los Angeles.
We both did. What do you call it? It's almost like tough guys. Most of the tough guys I knew personally, we seem to be not relaxed like others, and that's one thing I noticed on all the teams I played on. Hockey players, the true hockey players, were lackadaisical. They were comfortable. They were happy. Where us guys, I really believe that you're always thinking, okay, what's going to be for the next game and the next game. And it was a very volatile era that I was in.
Yeah, things have changed quite a bit.
Yes.
What about goalies, by the way? Speaking of attitudes, how are goalies' personalities?
Actually, I mean, they're in some ways they're a bit strange because they prepare differently for a game than what we did. But I mean, the little bit I got to know Tony Esposito, he was very quiet, laid back, just wanted to have a beer and get ready for the next game. And the goalies in Los Angeles, I remember, and in Calgary, I remember, they were different. In fact, I think we even on Calgary, since they came from the Atlanta Flames, a bunch of the guys were always picking on the goalies because they're
was that Dan Bouchard? I forgot.
Yeah.
I was trying to remember who the Calgary goalie was then. You know, it's interesting. I saw an interview with Dennis Potvin once, and he was talking about Billy Smith, and I know Billy Smith.
He was weird,
and I think he said something like, on game day, don't go near him, don't talk to him, don't rush up against him, you know, don't be anywhere near him, just leave him alone. So I guess he was unique like that. And also,
get this, I have a story there. I'm going in with the puck, and I'm right in front of the net, and the goalie, he slashes me across the back of my legs. I turned and one punched him. He went to the ice in the net. The whistle blew. I turned to see who I was going to have to fight. Nobody came. I found out later that they were happy I punched him in the and which again, I was such a serious person. I find that hilarious all these years later.
Well, it's interesting because you one punched Billy Smith and Ken Linsman, and those two themselves can get you a lot of admiration from your fellow NHL players, I'm sure, because I'm sure a lot of people want to. I'm sure a lot of people wanted to do both. Okay, so then you get to Calgary, which you've already said. Actually, wait, before we leave Los Angeles, in Los Angeles, were there any other remotely tough players? I'm trying to remember that team.
On the Kings?
On the Kings.
Well, Rats. I'm trying to think of his name. He has died. I really liked him. He lived down the street from me. Do you have any names you remember?
Yeah, I don't. Nothing comes. I'm trying to remember who was tough on the Kings. Oh, was Chartres? No, he wasn't on the.
No, it wasn't Chartres.
Yeah.
He wasn't there. Rats. He was.
I think, by the way, I know we can't think of it now. I think Chartres, by the way, speaking of interesting stories, or Chartres, of course, he played, I think, for Montreal and the Rangers, but I think he played for the Kings. Maybe not when you were there. But Rick Chartres was pretty tough, and the Rangers were playing the Kings, and Rick Chartres squared off with Barry Beck. Two tough guys, obviously, and the refs got in between them. The linesman got in between them. But Beck was so worked up, they didn't really have him. They didn't have him, and Beck threw a left hook around both linesmen. I'm not even sure how he did it, and he KO'd Chartres. It's on YouTube. Anyway, so
well, that might have been the end of his career. How long did he play?
Chartres?
Yeah, I played against him in junior. He was with the Kitchener Rangers.
Yeah, I think he was only in the NHL for about 3 years. I could be wrong. So then let's get to Calgary. So you go to Calgary. You've already said you had Willie Plett, Brad Marsh, because you had mentioned Brad Marsh in another talk we had, who, like I said, I never even knew was a fighter, but apparently he was.
Houston.
Ken Houston. It sounds like that was an enjoyable team for you in general.
Well, I had I had some interesting times against the Atlanta Flames, and so when I got traded by LA to the Calgary Flames when they moved to Calgary, I thought by this time okay, I'm going to get to know some of those tough guys that I had run-ins with, and turned out this was when I started finding out that they were just doing their job. I authentically hated the other team, and I think that really helped me. And then I get to Calgary, and I meet Willie Plett, who I hated, and he's a nice guy. He actually, I bought a house, and Willie had a house built right behind me. And so I got to know him, and then I got to know Brad Marsh, and Brad Marsh was just a wonderful person. And Ken Houston, wonderful person. And what do you think's going through my mind? I'm thinking, oh my God, I've hated these guys my whole career, and they're nice people. They're just doing a job. And from then on, that's how I played. I was just doing a job.
When you went to Washington, how was well, actually, but by the time you got to Washington, you had already had the realization some of these guys that I used to hate are just doing their job. So when you got to Washington, you already had that, let's say, maturity or realization. How else was the Washington experience?
I actually tried to in Calgary too, because Al McNeil said to me, Randy, we have the biggest, toughest team in hockey. You don't have to do it all yourself anymore. Try to play hockey. And I continued that in Washington, but Washington wasn't the Calgary Flames, but they did have the superstar Dennis Marouk and a couple others who were pretty good.
So when you got to Washington, you had not been Maruk's teammate since Cleveland. I'm sure you were happy to see each other.
Oh yeah, yeah. I never really got to know Dennis. He was a different person, lived a different life. He's a superstar, and I'm just a ordinary NHLer who could fight. But
You were in the NHL for 10 years, so that's
yes,
more than a lot of people can say.
yeah.
Philadelphia was your last stop as an NHL player. What was you already mentioned Bobby Clark and Holmgren. What are some other memories you have of being a Flyer?
Well, I got to well, first of all, my contract. I was dealing with my agent was dealing with the Washington Capitals, and Philadelphia stepped in and blew away the Capitals as far as how much they would pay me. That's why I went with them. But also after I got finished with the contract, I thought now I'm going to get to know Bobby Clark and Paul Holmgren and some of the others, and it turned out. It's too bad that my leg went on me, but it turned out to where when you listened to them in the dressing room and you watched them for those games that I was with them, they were all winners. Even the worst hockey players, their attitude was perfect, and what they said in the room, whatever was said in the room, was performed on the ice. I don't think many other teams that I ever played for had that determination and that clear-cut way they were going to get things done.
Listen, you obviously never played for the Islanders, but the Islanders won the Cup 80, 81, 82, 83. So the Islanders won the Cup 4 years in a row. You were in the league that entire time. You're mentioning this winner attitude the Flyers had. Of course, you never played for the Islanders, but did you get the impression they had that same attitude?
Oh, no doubt. That what I found out by the time I was 30, 31 years old, and my career ended at 32. When I got to see the Flyers the way they were, all the teams before did not have the meetings that we had, did not have the players that meant every word that was coming out of their mouth. And so to me, like you just said, the Islanders would have been very similar. And so now it's just a matter of who has the better talent. And I believe the Islanders, in my estimation, is one of the best teams ever.
Well, it's interesting. I remember one time I probably was in high school, so it was the early 1980s, and I was watching even though I was a Ranger fan, I lived in New York City, but I was watching an Islander game because I liked hockey enough. I didn't, I liked the Rangers, but I was watching an Islander game, and they had an away game against the Minnesota North Stars, I think. And Minnesota beat the Islanders in Minnesota. It was an away game for 2-1. And these guys were the Minnesota North Stars were celebrating like they just won the damn Stanley Cup. I mean, that's how good the Islanders were. Just beating them in a regular season game was humongous for other teams. And like you said, as far as one of the best teams ever, if you think about it, they had Billy Smith, they had Chico Resch, I think was the other goalie, or maybe Melanson. So the goalies were phenomenal. They had, Potvin and Ken Morrow and a lot of other great defensemen. We already know their forwards: Bassi, Trottier, Gillies, Nystrom.
Well, when they started the four. Do you know when they started the 4 in a row? Guess who they just got from LA?
Butch Goring.
Right, Butch Goring. I got to watch him for 2 years, and he never got the credit that he should have got because of Marcel Dion. Marcel Dion was one of the top players. Butch was a very good player. Now New York Islanders, who's a very good team, got this, and he ended up number 2 center behind Trottier. When Butch Goring is number 2 center on a great team like the Islanders, they're gonna do good. And so he got to enjoy that 4 Stanley Cups also.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, great team. And it's interesting. I saw an interview with Barry Beck once. It was he made a really good point, because of course Barry Beck was the Rangers captain for most of those years, 80, 81, 80. So he was suffering in the regular season and the playoffs, losing again and again. So the interviewer said something, asked Beck a question, and Beck gave a great answer. The interviewer said, "Look at all those Islanders, they're all in the Hall of Fame. Not all of them, but many of them are in the Hall of Fame. But you're not," they said to Barry Beck, "you're not in the Hall of Fame, and none of your Ranger teammates. Are you upset?" And Barry Beck says, "No, I'm not upset. We never won. They always beat us. So we should not be in the Hall of Fame." So I thought that was a very honest answer. He's like, They should be in the Hall of Fame. Look, he's like, "What do you think, Bossy and Potvin, and you think they shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame? Of course they should." So, good answer. Let's just go back to a couple other players. I just want to mention some what I consider, because like you even said, hockey. You were in the league from 74 to 84. The NHL during that time was a very rough league with a lot of tough fighters. And you mentioned the mindset of a fighter, little nervous about or agitated about the next. So let me mention some other names. Some of them you fought, some of them you didn't fight. But I just love to get a couple comments on some of the other renowned fighters of that era. So I'll start with Stan Jonathan of the Bruins.
Yeah, well, Stan, I mean, I played against him my last year in the OHA. He was with the Peterborough Pete's, I think, and I asked somebody at the Peterborough Pete's I met later, Roger Nielsen maybe, or somebody. I said, "How did you get Stan Jonathan?" And they said he came in right off the reservation, and anyway, not a very big guy, but incredible how he played. And I fought him 2 or 3 times, and Peterborough was probably an all-outer because I beat somebody, and then Stan came out of nowhere and challenged me, and I said to him, I remember still saying to him, "You little shit," and we started punching each other. When the fight was over, I think it was pretty even. I go to the dressing room. I'm with the Sudbury Wolves, and I'm thinking, who is that little shit that came in after I beat that one guy? And later on, I would find out it was Stan Jonathan.
Yeah, that's a great story. How about keeping in the Bruins, team? How about Terry O'Reilly?
Yeah, Terry. I played against him when he was with the Oshawa Generals, and to watch him skate and play as a hockey player, I didn't see much as a junior, as a 17, 18-year-old junior. But as the years went on, I could see why Boston drafted him number 1. But back when they drafted him, I got, God, he's not even a good skater, and he doesn't score that many points, and I don't think he's that great a fighter. What is it? And turns out that he was just an incredible leader on and off the ice, and the Boston Bruins really respected him.
And he became captain of the Bruins, I think, for a couple of years, and then he had a couple decent point getting years too.
Yeah, but that had to do with his centerman. Remember, he was old time NHL. He was incredible. I'm trying to think of his name.
Middleton.
No, Middleton was a winger.
Okay.
He was a centerman, and I swear, the way he played, I could have got 20 goals
in
a season.
How about Mel Bridgman?
Mel was what I thought a good all-around hockey player. He threw punches fast, but I didn't consider him in a league with some of the other guys that I had fought. And then I got to play with Mel that last year for me in Philadelphia. And again, quite eye-opening for me. He was a nice person.
Yeah.
And I think that's the greatest thing, moving around to different teams and finding out that these people were all kind of good human beings who were just doing their job, set me up to take a look at the real world that was coming quickly for me after hockey.
Yeah. Now, when you got to the Flyers, was Ben Wilson on the Flyers, or he was already on Chicago?
Yeah, I'm trying to. He was a tough one.
Because I'm wondering if he was your teammate in Philadelphia or if he had already been traded to Chicago.
He might have been traded, because how come I don't recall ever talking to Ben?
Yeah, maybe he was on Chicago already.
Yeah.
Did you have any run-ins with him over the years, or just seem to miss each other somehow?
It seemed that playing against, he never came near me. Paul Holmgren was the one, and there was a couple others that made an attempt, but Paul's the only one that I'll recognize on the Philadelphia Flyers.
So before we leave the Flyers, how about Glenn Cochran?
Very tough. Now, what I said before was playing against the Flyers, but then I went, and I can't remember if was it Glenn Cochran's first season or whatever. Anyway, incredible. He's right out of Slapshot, as far as I'm concerned. He should be in the movie Slapshot.
Okay, and just as we're wrapping up, some thoughts on players. How about Tiger Williams?
I fought Tiger a few times, and I didn't. Here's my I never thought that he was a very good fighter, but the first fight I ever had with him, we're throwing the punches, and then we're doing a wrestling match, and Tiger was pretty strong, but he then took one hand off, and instead of punching me in the face, he tried clawing my face. And I said later to the guys, I said, now I know how he got the nickname Tiger. He scratches you. And I'm not even sure if I ever said that to him later. I met him once, and as per usual, nice guy.
As you were being pulled apart by the linesman after he scratched you, did you say anything to him or the linesman?
Well, what do you call it? I think he had got me here in this part of my face, and I said to the linesman, I said, he scratched me, and the linesman said, yeah, you're bleeding in that area. It wasn't from a punch, so I don't consider that fighting.
Let me ask you this, just switching gears a little bit. When you were at your peak, well, we'll call it all at your peak. We'll call 74 to 84. What were your thoughts on diet? Like, were you watching what you ate because you wanted to, feel as good as possible? Or what were your thoughts on what you were eating during your career?
Well, my wife's a nurse, and like I said, luckily for me, she didn't scold me for being gonzo on the ice. She treated me like I was a human being, and but also she was into diet. So I never gave a second thought to until I seen some players that I played with that were single, so they had to make their own decisions, and some of them made them bad because the coach said, you have to lose 10 pounds, you have to lose 15 pounds. And I thought, wow, how did he get 15 pounds over? It didn't happen to me because my wife was a good cook, and being a nurse, she was knowledgeable on diet.
So let me ask you this. During your career, if you had a healthy meal, maybe you had, chicken and salad, if there was dessert, did you say to yourself, well, I'm burning so many calories being a pro athlete, I can eat dessert? Or were you strict to the point where you said, no, I don't want to have dessert because I'm trying to eat super healthy?
Well, I think I lucked out there because our family growing up, we didn't, like I said, my parents didn't have a lot of money, so groceries was very important. Uh, uh, and part of that was we never had dessert. So, I mean, the first time I ever had dessert would be when I left to play junior hockey, and uh, the lady, whoever was boarding me, um, they started producing these desserts that I never seen before.
What about on a similar subject, when you were a player? Now, obviously, you were staying in great shape by A, playing in games, B, being in practices. But and of course, you already mentioned lifting weights. You mentioned that earlier. Were there some other things that you did to stay in shape beyond what the team was putting you through?
Well, I really I started to run in the summer. Like I said, though, that from 11 years old to 16 years old, I worked in the lumberjack camp in the summer. And then after that, I think my first year pro, they handed me at the end of the season, they handed me a workout that they wanted, workouts that they wanted me to do that summer. And so that was the start of it. So I was probably 20 years old when I started doing the workouts that the team was providing for me. Now, never knew that before.
Well, let me ask you this, Randy. How many times, if at all, I don't know if it maybe it never happened, but how many times before games did coaches say to you, I mean, some things are obvious, of course, but how many times did coaches pull you aside and say, look, Randy, we already know this guy is going to be running around on the ice. We have to put a stop to that immediately. I want you to talk to this guy early in the game, or is it all just implied?
Well, the one that did it, and I told him he could where to go.
Yeah,
was Billy Ray for the Chicago Blackhawks. Oh, and the tough guy with me on Los Angeles.
yeah.
This is the story. It was Bert Wilson.
Bill Wilson, got it.
Bert was a good fighter, and he actually beat Ben Wilson. Yeah, during that where I set the all-time record, Ben Wilson fought Bert.
Mhm.
Anyway, what were we saying?
About the coaches talking to you about what you should do.
Well, Bert Wilson, we're playing against LA, and Bert Wilson in Chicago is actually running around, and he comes to me, the coach, and he goes, next time he's on the ice, I want you to go out and get him. And I said to him, F you.
Yeah.
Because I hadn't played in the game yet. Now, if he wouldn't have said anything, Bert and I naturally would have fought the next shift on the ice. But no coach had ever told me before that you got to go out and get that guy. And I told him to F off.
Yeah. Well,
and I was traded.
Well, Randy, I thoroughly enjoyed this interview, and I think anyone who watches it, who does know about your era in the NHL, will really love it. And even people who are not familiar with your era in the NHL will learn a lot. So thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate you having me on.